Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to yet more Warhammer 40k lore. Today, we're going to be looking into the Deathwatch, the mysterious formation of Adeptus Astartes specializing in Xenos killing warfare. So, let us start with the simple question, quote-unquote, who are the Deathwatch? Well, while I did say simple question, that is a little bit more complicated than you might at first think, because the Deathwatch has undergone quite a few revisions over the course of their history. To begin with, the Deathwatch was basically just a cooler version of the Adeptus Astartes. They got to wear awesome black power armor and cool silver shoulder pads, and that was pretty much all the reason for their very existence, basically. Later on, it came to light that they were primarily an instrument of his most holy Inquisition. As to precisely how or why, we didn't know. But a while later down the line, it was fleshed out that they were formed by a special conclave on a planet called Orfiti, where a group of prominent Inquisitors got together and talked about the current state of the Imperium, and came to the conclusion that they required a new force within the Inquisition, an Ordo militant for the Ordo Xenos, as the Imperium was currently heavily pressed from all sides by alien incursions. To begin with, this was supposed to be a semi-independent organization under the direct supervision of the Ordo Xenos, but with wider-reaching fiat to do whatever the hell they really wanted. But a little bit later, this all changed again, and at that point, the Deathwatch was specifically raised for very specific purposes. An Inquisitor would put out the call that he required a specialized formation of Adeptus Astartes to pursue a specific objective. A group of Astartes would then be raised, and they would then be led personally by the Inquisitor. Then this changed again, and the Deathwatch became known as a more independent organization that primarily relied upon the Inquisition for, well, target coordinates, basically. The Inquisition would find something interesting and just point the Deathwatch in the general direction, and then watch the blood, guts, and gore as it spattered all across said general direction. And then, finally, it changed again, with the release of The Beast series. A series which I basically gave up on, by the way, because good fucking god did it get stupid. And this is a series in which the Eldar infiltrated the Imperial Palace and launched an assault upon the Emperor's throne room itself, and considered this a diplomatic fucking overture. So if it got dumber, well, yeah, it was pretty goddamn silly. But hey, at the end of the day, that was just a test run for the Horus Heresy, and I did learn a lot of valuable lessons, so that's good. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So, what happened in The Beast Arises that gave rise to the Deathwatch? Well, apparently, back then the Inquisition was a unified force, but it became clear that they needed to specialize themselves, since they spent far too much time simply arguing with one another what was more dangerous, the demon, the heretic, or the alien. And so they eventually split into several different organizations. The Deathwatch was organized specifically to counter the threat of the Beast, a special kind of orc primarch, yes, actually, orc fucking primarch, that bred special orcs that were basically orc space marines, except it bred them by the millions, because raisons, and yet they still managed to fuck up conquering the galaxy. Somehow. And the Deathwatch played no small role in this eventual fuck-up, specializing themselves in hunting down valuable beast assets and big nasty brutish orcs to drag back for interrogation and study, which eventually allowed them to figure out their weakness is a strong term, but generally speaking anyways, and eventually defeat the orc primarchs. Yes, that's a plural. How precisely the orcs managed to make primarchs, well, never mind that one. It's not what we had to discuss anyway. So, the Deathwatch was created originally by the then Chapter Master of the Imperial Fist, who also declared himself master of pretty much all of the Imperium's military, Coland. He created the original Deathwatch and eventually passed it over to the Inquisition as a diplomatic overture, a sign of goodwill and continued faith in their mission. However, he did place down some stipulations. For example, the Deathwatch should always be run by an Adeptus Astartes, a de facto chapter master known as the Watch Commander. He would have complete authority over the deployment of the Deathwatch. In other words, he would have to actually approve any requests from the Ordo Xenos to deploy the Deathwatch. This has since changed rather dramatically, and these days there are an unknown number of Watch Commanders. And it seems as if the title has simply come to mean the commander of an individual watch fortress, rather than an overarching commander. Although it does appear as if they still have one of those, he just doesn't have anywhere near the same kind of authority that he once had. Another stipulation Corlin put down was that the Deathwatch was never to number more than a single chapter of Adeptus Astartes, e.g. 1,000 troops. This also seems to have been either forgotten or simply just flat out ignored as the demand for Deathwatch troops increased. These days it's very hard to come up with a precise estimate, but the Deathwatch is most assuredly well above 1,000 battle brothers, probably somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000, which puts them well above the standards of the Codex Astartes, but still nothing particularly insane. It's not like we're talking about the Space Wolves and their great companies here or anything. And on top of this general confusion as to their origins, we also don't really know how they operate these days. The Deathwatch fluff is in dire need, honestly, of a full rewriting and organization, since currently we don't even really know if the Deathwatch is in any way truly connected to the Ordo Xenos anymore, as it has even been suggested that they might be an entirely separate organization without any true links to the Inquisition, beyond of course simply being allowed to operate as an individual Astartes entity. I don't like that interpretation at all, honestly, because, well, the Deathwatch literally carry the stylized eye of the Inquisition on their fucking shoulder pads. Honestly, they are in dire need of a full rewrite and organization, but for the purpose of this video, we're gonna go with the version that I personally prefer the most, because honestly, it is currently so utterly confused and muddled up that I think it is pretty much impossible right now to say which one is truly the canon version, especially as, of course, the recent Codex has already been contradicted by various novels released as well, so I feel fairly justified in taking some potential liberties with this. So the version I am going to go with is that the Deathwatch is clearly linked directly to the Inquisition, because again, they are literally carrying their symbol on their shoulder guard. That makes the link rather bloody obvious in my opinion. But that does not necessarily mean that they are entirely subordinate to the Inquisition. It is very clear that the Deathwatch does not exist as a force raised specifically on the request of individual Inquisitors. It is clearly an organization that exists by itself and therefore undoubtedly has its own goals and agenda, considering the simple fact that the Inquisition itself is an extremely splintered organization, where essentially every single Inquisitor is pursuing his own goals and agenda. It would essentially be impossible for the Deathwatch to exist as a coherent force if they didn't preserve their own independent organization from individual Inquisitors. In other words, there is a Deathwatch, they are a wider organization commanded by their watch commanders, and they undoubtedly have their own ideas and agendas of how the war against the Xenos should be fought. However, they are also a recognized Ordo militant of the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition, meaning that whenever the Inquisition requires their help, they may put in a request, and in all due likelihood the request is going to be granted. This all means then that the Deathwatch will be able to continue to serve in their glorious duty as the Ordo militant of the Ordo Xenos, while still maintaining a fair bit of independence, as you would expect of any large organization of Adeptus Astartes. The big old Space Marines rarely play particularly well with others, after all, for any kind of extended periods of time, and therefore it is only reasonable to assume that they would be granted considerable self-governmentship, because otherwise they'd probably get rather pissy. And now that we've come to something that at least vaguely resembles a conclusion as to their origins, let's talk a little bit more specifically about precisely who the Deathwatch are, because that is another question with a fair bit of nuance in it. You see, the Deathwatch is not a homogeneous formation of Adeptus Astartes. Instead, it is drawn from all of the various chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, or, well, actually, that's not necessarily entirely correct. They are, technically speaking, drawn from all of the various chapters, because all of the various chapters does have some form of obligation to send Battle Brothers to the Deathwatch. But that, of course, assumes, one, that the various chapters actually do this, which, for the most part, they do, but you've always got some chapters who want to, push the limits just a little bit, and some chapters that might even be ideologically opposed to the Deathwatch for some minute fault or difference in opinion. Perhaps they're simply not particularly fond of how the Deathwatch do things. Perhaps they view their level of secrecy with a great amount of distrust. There are many reasons why a chapter might be somewhat hesitant to send away one of their battle brothers, and there are quite a few ways for a hesitant chapter to, shall we say, complicate the transfer process, practically indefinitely should they feel particularly stubborn. Now, how precisely does this work? How is this organized? Well, first and foremost, the Deathwatch regulates its size dependent upon the need for Deathwatch personnel. For example, if this is a particularly peaceful period in the galaxy, unlikely, but could happen, the Deathwatch might decide to release many of their battle brothers back to their parent chapters because they have no particular need to maintain a large standing force. And as always, with any organization directly linked to the Inquisition, there might be Inquisitors snooping around, getting a bit suspicious of why the Deathwatch feel the need to maintain such a strength in a relative lull in the fighting, and so on and so on. Alternatively, it might be a period of great violence, like for example the recent split of the galaxy, where the Deathwatch is in desperate need of every single battle brother they can get their hands on. In this case, they will send out envoys and communiques to the various chapters demanding, or, well, let's be honest, requesting first, then demanding later, if the request is not met, that the chapters fulfill their ancient obligation to the Inquisition, to the Imperium, and to the Deathwatch by offering up some of their battle brothers to come train and conduct operations with the Deathwatch. Generally speaking, this is seen as an honor, and so, generally speaking, service within the Deathwatch is awarded to veteran personnel as a honor, essentially. This is meant to be a reward. Some chapters think it is a reward more than others, and for some chapters, service in the Deathwatch might as well be a flat-out punishment. For example, for the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves have a very strong pack mentality. They are very tied to their squad mates, their invited company, and they feel very much so uneasy if they're not near their packmates, and as such, getting sent halfway across the galaxy to serve in a Deathwatch, where there is absolutely no guarantee that they'll be put in a squad with a second Space Wolf, yeah, they're probably going to be hard-pressed to find that too much of an honor. On the other hand, it does also mean that they'll be sent off to hunt some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, and that is a pretty good salve on the wound for a Space Wolf. And of course, the more lore-savvy amongst you might already have noticed a wee bit of a problem. Assuming that the various chapters decide to actually send people to the Deathwatch, which again, most of them do because it is considered, generally speaking, to be an honor, you then have one tiny little problem. Most Astartes chapters think that they, and only they, are the best thing ever, or at the very least, that their parent legion is the best thing ever. And even then, there are plenty of chapters that actually have serious problems tolerating their own successor chapters. So you can imagine just how interesting it gets when you have Space Marines from potentially hundreds, if not thousands of different chapters, all bedding, bunking, training, eating, and fighting together. Ooh, wow. Training them, and getting anything that even vaguely resembles unit cohesion out of all of that, can be a rather interesting challenge. This is another reason why the Deathwatch usually requests veteran personnel, because at least they will, generally speaking, have gotten the worst of the excitement out of their blood. Although I know that at least on one occasion, the Deathwatch was sent an entire pack of Space Wolf Blood Claws, presumably as a giant fuck you. Or if you wish to be charitable, perhaps it was merely a test of the Deathwatch's training system. And in addition to the requests made by the Deathwatch, it is also possible that chapters will send troops of their own volition. Let us, for example, say that one brother Astartes is particularly good at murdering Xenos. He might be sent off by his chapter to join the Deathwatch, specifically to enhance his Xeno-killing potential. This, of course, might also be political. Whenever the Inquisition is involved, there is always a great deal of politics involved. This could be another reason why certain chapters are, shall we say, hesitant to send off their battle brothers to join the Deathwatch, because they're not entirely sure what their battle brothers might be used for once they're sent off to the Deathwatch. And of course, the Deathwatch might even be used as a political bargaining tool. Let us, for example, say that one of the formations that has a more, shall we say, strained relationship to the Inquisition, like the Blood Angels and their habit of going batshit crazy and drinking blood, they might require a bit more convincing than, for example, the Imperial Fists to join the Deathwatch. However, if you were to promise them something, like, for example, that the next Inquisitor who passes by their home world of Baal is simply just going to give it a quick one-over and then fuck off back wherever he belongs, then maybe that will somehow result in the Blood Angels sending 2 recruits rather than the one they were strictly speaking required to send. And of course, the exact opposite also occasionally holds true. For example, in the case of the Ultramarines. If a battle brother in the Ultramarines show a particular promise for murdering Xeno's filth, then his chaplain, attesting for his mental fortitude, his apothecary attesting to his physical fortitude, and his captain attesting to his Xeno's killing potential might all agree to go join the chapter master, where they will be discussing the young battle brother's secondment to the Deathwatch. If all 4 agree, then he is officially seconded to the Deathwatch, and a grand ceremony is held, where as much of the company as possible is gathered to send off the young battle brother, or potentially old battle brother, depending, on his great and glorious journey to join the Emperor's most honored Inquisition, the Ordo Xenos, the shield against the alien menace. In other words, they send him off with as close to a party as the Adeptus Astartes are ever likely to come. And as you can probably imagine, this rather wide disparity between how the various chapters see service in the Deathwatch further complicates their training process. And speaking of training, most Astartes have to go through a extraordinarily grueling and rigorous regime of physical and mental exercise just to be considered to eventually become a Space Marine, and once they finally become elevated to the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes, they trade out that hard-as-shit training regime for an even worse one. But when they arrive at the Deathwatch, they will have fond memories of just how soft their initial training really was. First and foremost, their physical and psychological training regimes are amped up considerably. Not really, strictly speaking, because the Space Marines need it. They are already as physically and mentally fit as they can ever possibly be. But here's the trick. If you can absolutely exhaust the shit out of the poor motherfuckers, make them so utterly dog-death tired that they can barely think about anything else but completing that hellish training regime, And they're not going to have a lot of time to hate the shit out of the Space Marine next to them now, are they? And while you might think, that doesn't sound very useful, surely they're brother Astartes. And yes, in some cases you would be correct. There are some chapters that are capable of working alongside one another with great success, with mutual respect, that value each other's traditions, their values, their tactics, and their doctrines. And then you put a White Scar and a Raven Guard next to one another, and watch them bicker endlessly, continuously, without a single moment of pause nor respite, until one decides to stab the other. Now, of course, that is an extreme scenario, and there are exceptions, but generally speaking, Raven Guards and White Scars hate each other. Some chapters might view others with animosity, or, grudging respect, or disregard. For example, the Blood Angels are not fond of the Storm Wardens. They don't hate them, they don't particularly dislike them, but the Storm Wardens once aided the Blood Angels without actually being asked to aid the Blood Angels, and so the Blood Angels consider them to be a bit of a bunch of meddling busybodies. Or, for example, you've got the Ultramarines and the Iron Hands, both of which are strict, regimented, and very dour chapters. You'd think they'd love each other, but they have some fundamental differences of doctrinal approach that means they'll never quite be friendly with one another. Basically, the various interaction between the members of a Deathwatch kill team can vary between friendly camaraderie to outright vicious physical hostility. Now, of course, the Deathwatch will attempt to avoid the clearest antagonistic pairings, because fucking duh. But simultaneously, when they have to scrape together whatever they have during a period of extreme pressure, for example, they might not have the luxury of separating all of the Raven Guards from the White Scars. And in these circumstances, essentially what you have to do is break them down to the point of fresh, young recruits, exhausted, pitiful motherfuckers crawling through the mud, just wishing that it'll finally goddamn end. Because in that situation, just merely having an outreached hand to help you up a steep incline, that might be enough for you to forget, at least momentarily, that the motherfucker who's reaching out his hand is a Raven Guard. Sadly, however, it is extraordinarily difficult to get an Astartes properly fucking exhausted, so this modus of training does have its limitations. They do, however, utilize another rather sneaky tactic. Now, of course, even if the recruit in question was very good at killing Xenos with his original chapter, he might have faced a few hundred different Xeno species, but there are millions of different Xeno species infesting the galaxy like some form of plague, and there is no way that any individual battle brother has fought all of them. And so, each individual soldier is hypnotically introduced to every single Xeno-species the Deathwatch has ever run into, and every single sub-variant of said species. This is the same hypno-indoctrination that is used in fresh recruits in the Astartes chapters to make sure they are properly loyal, and they learn all of the things they need to do. Basically, how this works is, let us say that they're trying to teach a Space Marine how to operate, clean, load his bolter. They will hypno-introduce the suggestions on how to do this into his mind via a very specialized apparatus. After this is done, the Space Marine will have an instinctual understanding and eventually an actual technical understanding on how to do something like, for example, taking apart, cleaning, and reassembling his bolter. To begin with, this is almost an instinctual action. You know how when you bend down to tie your shoelaces, you don't really think about how you're going to do that, you just do it. Hell, a lot of people find this to be particularly annoying. You know how you've got your little credit card, your debit card or whatever, you slot it in at the cashier and you just hammer in the code. Do you actually remember that code? Or is that just muscle memory? I kid you not, this might just be my idiotic brain fucking me over, but I once thought so much about that I flat out forgot my PIN code, and I had to basically stand there like, clear your mind, so I could do it all on autopilot. Now obviously that is a crude comparison brought up by my own little retarded brain, but the principle is the same. A young battle brother might not necessarily know how to take apart, clean, and reassemble his bolter, but he can do it. In fact, it is almost done like a form of meditation, and after having done it enough time, his brain will start picking up the piece of information that has been placed within it by the hypnotic suggestion, and eventually he will then understand why and how he is doing it, and then he can start doing it consciously. And that last part is a very necessary step, because if you don't know specifically why you are doing something, then you might know how to load your bolt pistol. You might also know that you're supposed to be cleaning the bolt pistol's barrel, but you might not know that you're supposed to be cleaning the bolt pistol's barrel after removing the magazine, and that you're not supposed to be fiddling around with the trigger while you're doing it. So, the Deathwatch uses this kind of hypnotic suggestion, but of course not for this stuff. Any Space Marine sent to the Deathwatch is already well versed in how his weapons operate. However, he might not know how the Xenos operate. As previously mentioned, there are a damned lot of them. And so the Deathwatch uses their hypnotic suggestions to introduce the Space Marines to the various Xeno species, and they do so in a rather ingenious way. They introduce them to their strengths and their weaknesses by relaying to them combat experiences that other Astartes have had, including moments when the Astartes has lost. In other words, they are literally showing the Astartes what it would be like to be killed by such a Xeno species. When you run literally tens of thousands of video clips of your brethrens being murdered by these horrible things, you can imagine that the Space Marines can start becoming a wee bit agitated. In fact, they tend to become so agitated that it has become standard practice to simply lock them down in their chairs while they're undergoing this procedure. And of course, this has a side benefit. Not only does it teach the Astartes how to murder aliens and how to avoid being murdered by aliens, it also gives them a valuable perspective. Maybe that son of a bitch in the white scars is a massive asshole who fucked us over in our time of need, yes, but the Xenos are worse. And after all of this, when there is no longer any real overhanging danger that the Adeptus Astartes will start stabbing each other because of a mean look exchanged in the mess hall, they can actually start working together on becoming proper soldiers. Now, you might be thinking, these are Astartes, they already know how to fight, and yes, that is actually precisely the problem. They know how to fight. They all know how to fight in different ways. And when you're going to have a kill team with anything from 5 to 12 members, you might have anywhere from 5 to 12 different ways of fighting. And occasionally these ways of fighting could be the exact opposite of one another. This could lead to some rather problematic circumstances, where, for example, in a situation where a Space Wolf would find it better to charge, an Ultramarine might find it better to conduct a tactical withdrawal. And now you've got one Astartes running screaming towards the enemy, and another Astartes backing away slowly while looking at the Space Wolf in mild confusion. Not exactly conductive of overly efficient team play, as you can probably imagine. Now, the Deathwatch will try to smooth over some of these differences, and maybe even come up with some of their own tactics and doctrines. After all, they have been fighting the Xenos threat for quite a while, so they probably have come up with a few tricks here and there, but it can be quite difficult to convince an Astartes that his old doctrines actually might not be the most optimal, considering, again, that slight pride issue they have. And generally speaking, the Deathwatch is more or less content allowing them to maintain their own tactical doctrines. They will of course teach them how to work together, and they'll make sure that they know what other members of their party might do in any given situation by running them through countless of combat simulators and drills so that they can get familiar with one another, but generally speaking, trying to reprogram an Adeptus Astartes is far more effort than it's really worth. And let's be honest here, a lot of the reason why many of these Battle Brothers got so damn good at killing the filthy, dirty Xeno scum is precisely those tactics to begin with. So trying to unprogram them, regardless of how tempting it might be to properly make them Deathwatch Marines, generally speaking just isn't worth the time and effort. And now, speaking of time and effort, I think I'm going to cynically get paid for mine. Here's a random-ass advertisement. And now that my shekels are secured, let us actually talk about the positive things of training, because we've gone a lot over the difficulties of retraining Astartes, because, well, it is a damn difficult thing to do. Very, very much so, but occasionally the Deathwatch manages, and occasionally their indoctrination of hating the Xenos is so effective that maybe, just maybe, the Astartes starts to feel that the Deathwatch is where he can truly do the most good for the wider Imperium. After going on countless assignments and seeing what they can really do when they work together, and how effective the Deathwatch can actually be once it starts combining the strengths of the various chapters, rather than just their animosities, they may start to truly appreciate their assignment at the Deathwatch. It might even go beyond the ideas of a temporary assignment, or an honor bestowed upon them, or in some cases a punishment. Occasionally, they might even find that the Deathwatch is more of a home to them than their parent chapter was, although that is very rare, but generally speaking, Deathwatch members that have actually gotten into their teams and really gotten into the groove of things, they've managed to figure out the various differences within their teams and become a truly effective kill team, they become known as Deathwatch veterans. And of course there are those who are even more so a Deathwatch veteran, the ones that actually do find a real home within the Deathwatch, and occasionally might even request their parent chapter to be allowed to stay within the Deathwatch, until their grisly demise at the hands of some filthy Xenos, of course. And here's the real thing. Because this is a lot of work, this is a lot of effort, and it's really, really difficult process to get these various chapters to actually work together. So much that you might even start thinking that this doesn't sound like it's worth it at all. This can't possibly be effective, but it really is. Imagine having the unbridled ferocity and savagery of a space wolf bound together with the implacable discipline and strength of character of an Imperial fist. Or how about the combination of the White Scars' favorite hit-and-run tactics, being able to strike at high speed with great degrees of accuracy, combined with the Raven Guard's ability to get pretty much anywhere completely undetected. You couldn't ask for a better hit-and-run team. The simple reality is that the innumerable problems, trials, and tribulations involved in getting these Astartes to cooperate with one another, it's all worth it in the end, once they actually start utilizing each other's specializations and strengths to their full potential. And it is this cooperation, far more so than their new training or their new weapons or their artificer armor, that truly make the Deathwatch an elite force within the Astartes. Oh, and by the way, is it just me, or do we have way too many elites these days? We've got the Deathwatch, they've got their own codex. We've got the Adeptus Custodes, of all things, they've got a codex now. And we've got the Primaries. It seems like we're practically swimming in super soldiers these days. It's almost as if Games Workshop is kind of starting to run out of ingenuity or something, and is basically just going, well, the Space Marines sell well, so let's make more Space Marines. And whilst I am painfully aware of the irony of expressing this sentiment in this video, of all videos, I kinda wish we'd get some more Xenos soon. Admittedly, the Deathwatch is probably of the opposite inclination on that particular subject, but Hey, at least I'm an Inquisitor, so they can't kill me for expressing that wish. Right then, speaking of weapons and armor, let's talk a bit about that, because of course, even the most well-trained and coordinated kill team might want some actual weapons once they're facing down the alien hordes. And as you may well expect, considering the somewhat diverse nature of their specialization, the Deathwatch has access to a wide variety of highly specialized weaponry. Now, generally speaking, of course, in the case of general equipment and armament, you would like to have as much standardization as humanly possible, but that isn't the case of equipping an actual army. When it comes to equipping small Deathwatch kill teams of between 5 to 12 members, who often get sent on very, very specialized missions, you would much rather prefer to maximize their impact upon the target at hand rather than equip them for any and all eventualities. Not to mention the obvious that Deathwatch kill teams are far too valuable to be sent in willy-nilly to deal with mere foot soldiers. Whilst a kill team might make a serious dent in even the largest Tyranid swarm, their talents are far better directed against the leaders of said swarm. For example, let's say that they have identified a particularly vicious hive tyrant, who seem to develop a wide range of rather unfortunate mutations, or, in the case of the Tyranids, specialized genetic modifications that makes it a superlative war leader. Now, obviously, you'd like to kill the damn thing because it's making a mess out of your defenses, and secondly, you wouldn't want the Hive Fleet to be able to reacquire the genome required to produce more of these damned things. And so you might deploy a Deathwatch kill team equipped with armor-bane missile launchers. Because here's the thing. 1, a Hive Tyrant is a rather tough target at the best of days, and 2, it is generally speaking surrounded by hundreds of thousands of screaming little Tyranids, not to mention the potential existence of Tyranid Hive Guards, which are also basically just living giant shields for the Hive Tyrant. In this case, a direct assault is unlikely to prove particularly successful. However, if you can find the thing from a considerable distance and then fire armor-bane missile launchers with the benefit of special auger arrays, homing missiles, prey sight, and red dot laser sights, you might be able to murder the damn thing with repeated volleys of horrifying screaming missile-y nonsense from several kilometers away, and then jump on a dropship and get the fuck out of Dodge before the 100,000 angry little Tyranids reach your position in search of vengeance. Another particularly adorable little weapon is the Balefire gun. This is a form of flamethrower, kinda, using a very specialized form of ammunition that contains highly refined and irradiated promethium. It's literally a combination of a radiation gun and a flamethrower. It is, as you can imagine, a weapon that is not particularly gentle on the local environment, but it does perform absolute wonders in making sure that highly resilient creatures, like orcs for example, stay the fuck down after being doused in the brilliant radiance of a nuclear flamethrower. And of course, the Deathwatch also possesses more normal weapons, shall we say, if you could ever refer to the fact that the bolter is basically a fully automatic grenade launcher as a normal weapon, but hey, details. I speak, of course, of the Deathwatch bolter. It is, for most intents and purposes, a regular bolter, except every one is produced to the highest standard. No Mars-level mass production here, or, well, even regular bolters are produced to a standard far beyond that of lasguns, but, well, these are even specialer special bolters. And this is the problem with having all of your forces be elite forces, because eventually you run out of elite. But of course, that is not the only difference between the regular bolter and a Deathwatch bolter. It also contains a wide array of optical upgrades, since there are certain alien species that have a nasty habit of blending into the environment, shall we say. Additionally, it also possesses lumen suppressors and various other dampening effects. trying to extend the amount of time between the Deathwatch starting to fire and the vile filthy Xenos figuring out roughly where they are and hosing down their general position with whatever manners of foul range weapons they might possess. Or claws. That's also possible. Large numbers of claws. Very, very possible, in fact. Additionally, the Deathwatch bolter is also usually equipped with a wider variety of ammunition than your standard issue bolt gun. Generally speaking, a regular bolter only has two types of rounds: anti-infantry, or, well, anti-soft targets to be more precise, and anti-hard targets. Originally, the hard target rounds were known as vengeance rounds, and were developed by the Loyalists after the betrayal on Istvan. The traitors, of course, had already realized they were going to be fighting power-armored foes, and had already developed them. Much to the chagrin of the Loyalists, as you can probably imagine. Meanwhile, the Deathwatch have developed a wide range of ammunition specialized in dealing with certain targets, like, for example, the Kraken bolts, which is designed to deal with large beasties of the Tyranid variety. Or again, speaking of Tyranids, they might utilize Hellfire rounds, which explode in a small splattering of extraordinarily vicious acid, which small Tyranids find exceedingly uncomfortable. Or perhaps Dragonfire rounds that contain very, very unstable and extraordinarily hot gas, very useful against cowardly targets hiding in cover. Or how about the Vengeance round Mark II? The original Vengeance rounds were literally just better armor-piercing ammunition designed to defeat power armor. These days, the Vengeance rounds have developed to something considerably more, shall we say. They utilize extraordinarily unstable flux core technology that literally tears a target apart on the molecular level, ripping apart not only armor, but a good chunk of what's behind said armor as it travels through the target. Essentially, you could kind of view it as a miniaturized black hole that exists for a split instance as it travels through the target's body, literally tearing him apart from the inside out. Extraordinarily uncomfortable weapons, but also somewhat unreliable, shall we say. It is, after all, an inescapable truth that Astartes weapons are, generally speaking, pretty damn good, and so it comes as no surprise that the Deathwatch has taken several of them and converted them to their more specific needs. The Stalker pattern bolt gun, for example, fitted with an audio suppressor and a longer barrel, essentially making it into a sniper version of the bolt gun. A sniper version of an automatic grenade launcher. Only in 40k, folks. Or what about this one, a Infernus Heavy Bolter? It is a heavy bolter firing extra large explosive rounds, designed to be fired whilst on the move, mind you, a lighter version of the heavy bolter, very much so quote unquote, with a heavy flamer slung beneath the barrel. Because of course, why the fuck not? They also utilize the humble shotgun, or, well, humble is perhaps not the correct term, as it is used by the Deathwatch. Again, just a shotgun is not necessarily that interesting of a weapon, which is why the ammunition is rather important. Amongst other things, it is capable of firing cluster sub-munition in the form of the Crypt Calera rounds, or the Worm's Breath shell, which literally fires small pellets containing promethium that then explode in a massive cloud of fiery death. The Deathwatch also creates essentially entirely new weapons based upon old ones. For example, the Hesh pattern bolter is essentially a stripped-down, miniaturized version of the standard issue bolter, a form of Uzi bolter, to put it undelicately. It is designed specifically to be used in very cramped conditions. For example, if one had to crawl through the ducts of a cramped space hulk, or used within Deathwatch vehicles as a weapon of point-blank defense. Obviously, the Deathwatch also utilizes a wide array of melee weapons because a lot of Xenos have a certain taste for close quarters combat. This includes a fair bit of rare weaponry as well, like for example Astartes power spears, which is practically only used by the Iron Snakes chapter. These spears were donated to the Watch Fortress Eriok by that very chapter. It's not something that many Astartes have any real training with using, but a spear does undoubtedly have certain benefits, especially when you're fighting potentially very large and very angry Xenos beasties with lots and lots of scything claws. Additionally, they have a ton of relic blades, far more than their size should really suggest. They also have a very high number of power weapons in various types. Power falchions, Astartes executioner axes, which are basically bigger, nastier two-handed power axes. They've got artificer axes, they've got even Crozier's arcanums for their own chaplains. They've also got heavy thunderhammers. Yes, heavy thunderhammers. Because a regular old thunderhammer just won't do for the Deathwatch. They've also got some really retardo rare shit, like Xeno faceblades. These are, well, considered by most to be techno-heresy flat out, since it is literally a sword capable of phasing through set matter, meaning it doesn't cut through armor, it literally just ignores it, passes through it, and starts slicing the soft bits beneath it. There are many that suggest that this might not be an entirely imperial form of technology, to put it that way. They also have Guardian Spears, which is very interesting because the Custodians are not very fond of anyone having Guardian Spears but them. I'm wondering what the Custodians would say if they knew that the Deathwatch were actually using them. I'm sure the Deathwatch wants to keep that information just a tad bit confidential, though. And, of course, the best weapons in the galaxy are of little use unless you can actually find and then fire them at something worthwhile. And for this particular purpose, the Deathwatch employ a wide array of rather un-Astartes tools, including various hacking weapons capable of taking over enemy control systems for unlocking doors and stuff, if you're fighting a Xeno species intelligent enough to construct doors, and of course specialized auspexes far more sensitive than those used by the regular guard or indeed the Astartes themselves. These auspexes can be fine-tuned to the point where they can pick up specific gene patterns within a Tyranid horde, meaning that if they are looking for one specific thing, like let's for example say that the Tyranids come up with the idea that, okay, our big beasties are getting blasted to shit every time because they are large and very easy to spot. What if you made a very small but very brainy creature that might be very difficult to pick out from the thousands of other Tyranids? Well, this Auspex will deal with that little conundrum quite nicely indeed. But of course, even the biggest gun and the most sophisticated of detection system means nothing unless you can actually get a kill team to the location where the bad things are. To this purpose, the Deathwatch employs some highly specialized crafts. They usually use the relatively regular stuff on the ground, except enhanced often with specialized sensors and/or stealth fields. Well, stealth fields is a strong term for what the Imperium uses in the 41st millennium, but you get the general idea. As for spacecraft, they generally utilize Adeptus Astartes vessels, except slightly modified to make them a little bit more stealthy, seeing as they have access to all kinds of inquisitorial and mechanicus tech that even the Astartes usually have a hard time getting their hands on, including some very specialized crafts, chief amongst them being the Corvus Blackstar. The name implies rather readily what it is specialized in. It is a stealthy infiltration vessel capable of deploying a single kill team directly onto the battlefield while also providing them with a considerable amount of fire support. It is a relatively small craft, more compact than a Thunderhawk, and equipped with vectored engines. This allows it to dance and dart in between even the tightest of canyons, allowing the kill team to deploy secretively and stealthily. But it's not simply just an infiltration craft. It does that job very, very well, but when deployed in larger scale operations, as they occasionally are, not necessarily all filled with the kill team, mind you, they are also excellent air superiority fighters, carrying a wide range of weaponry. They might be equipped with twin-launch assault cannons for a little bit of daka-daka air-to-air, and of course, also useful for hosing down enemy positions, along with a specialized rocket launcher capable of firing both fragmentation missiles to clear out swaths of enemy ground targets, or air-to-air guided missiles, with a particularly vicious machine spirit in control that can track down even the most elegant and nimble of Eldar craft, and anything less nimble is basically just dead fucking meat. They can also carry a twin-linked las cannon, in case they're going to need a little bit of anti-tank cracking potential. Not to mention, whilst the twin-linked assault cannon is more than enough to whack most aircraft out of the sky, if you need to crack open something a little bit more heavily armoured, nothing does that quite as well as a good old las cannon. And don't let the relatively sleek look of the aircraft fool you. It is surprisingly rugged, being able to shrug off even direct hits from enemy guns. And for added protection, it can also be fitted with a very, very unique piece of kit: the Infernum Halo Launcher. Now, whilst all Imperial crafts have some form of flares, some form of decoy, this is far more sophisticated. It is capable of deploying a wide array of Auspex interference devices capable of screwing with the guidance system of enemy missiles. It also deploys regular flares, and it deploys miniature guided sub-munition to home in on and destroy enemy missiles. And, of course, finally, even if you can find the enemy, even if you can get to the enemy, and even if you can kill the enemy, it might all be for naught if you get killed as well. This necessitates a bit of protection then, and the Deathwatch, as with all other things, have the pick of practically anything and everything when it comes to protection as well. Essentially, the Deathwatch is the most spoiled Astartes chapter in the entire Imperium. They don't have to follow the rules of the Codex Astartes, they don't have to limit their area of operations, and they get all of the best toys, including the finest armor. Every single suit of Deathwatch power armor has been tailored to its wearer by the expert artificers of the Deathwatch and their finest tech marines. Additionally, they have access to huge numbers of artificer armor suits, which are generally speaking reserved for Deathwatch veterans and their officers. And now, finally at the end, a note about Deathwatch's organizational structure. So, the Deathwatch, as we learned previously, are commanded by so-called Watch Commanders. Back in the day, there was one Watch Commander who had overall command of the Deathwatch, and it was not to exceed 1,000 members. These days, there's a hell of a lot more. Each Watch Commander is in command of one Deathwatch fortress or headquarter building. In addition to this, there is an unknown number, probably stretching into the hundreds, of minor watch stations, usually commanded by a watch captain or some other prominent officer. The primary difference between just a watch tower and a Deathwatch fortress is, of course, the numbers of Deathwatch kill teams it can contain. A Deathwatch headquarters building or similar fortress commanded by a watch commander could have as many as 5 watch companies, each company commanded by a watch captain containing up to 4 kill teams. This means that a Deathwatch fortress, including the command staff, the tech marines, the apothecaries, the librarius, and of course the chaplains, could contain anywhere between 100 to 260 odd Astartes. The considerable discrepancy is of course due to the fact that a kill team could be anywhere between 5 to 12 members strong. A watchtower, however, a single structure, is generally speaking outfitted to support only a single kill team, and some of the smaller ones are outfitted specifically to support only half a kill team. One of the smaller ones, 5 to 6 members, and a single watch captain, along with potentially 1 or 2 specialist personnel, preferably a tech priest to maintain gear, of course, although that can also be done by servants, although less expertly, shall we say, perhaps a librarian or a chaplain to tend to the spiritual needs of the Battle Brothers. Additionally, the Deathwatch does occasionally operate even smaller outposts if they are required to undergo long-term specialized missions. For example, in an assassination against an elusive target, they might want to keep only a small team of a handful of members on call at any one time. They have also been known to operate very, very small units, we're talking 2 to 3 members, that are specifically designed to fulfill minor tasks. For example, operating a rearmament or refueling station in an area where they don't have a watch fortress, operating forward bases that might potentially come under attack by various marauding xenospecies, and other less wholesome things. For example, the deployment of a kill ship. Now, a kill ship is a rather specialized piece of kit. It is an almost entirely unmanned vessel, except not quite, because we all know how the Imperium feels about artificial intelligence. In other words, it has a crew of servitors, which are technically a manned crew, although, well, they're by no means human, are they? They're essentially just programmed puppets that have something at least vaguely resembling humanity still lingering within them. Anything to avoid the blight of AI, especially considering the task of the kill ship, since its purpose is to sneak past enemy defenses and deploy a single exterminator's warhead to a planet. This is usually done as a last fuck you to any enemy that has managed to beat off the Imperium's defenders and is about to take control over their planet. These kill ships are regularly deployed against the Tyranids because, 1, stopping the Tyranids is fucking difficult, extraordinarily expensive, and occasionally it's flat out just more economical to let the Tyranids take a planet, let them start utilizing its resources, and just as they begin thinking they can start pumping it up into orbit, blow the whole fucking thing to smithereens, along with all of that delicious biomass and any Tyranids that they've plopped down on the planet to gather said biomass. A somewhat cuntish and spiteful thing, perhaps, but undoubtedly effective. And even though one of these kill ships is entirely capable of operating entirely without any form of guidance, considering the rather specialized nature of the thing and the fact that it borders very, very closely to full-on tech heresy, the Deathwatch will usually have some form of minor presence in system to, at the very least, tell them that something went horribly wrong, in case something goes horribly wrong. Now then, with that in mind, let's try and come up with a rough estimate of how many Deathwatch members there actually are at loose in the galaxy. Right, so we know they have at least 16 major bases. If we take the maximum numbers there, we're looking at something along the lines of 4,000 Astartes. But that is of course assuming that every single kill team is a full 12 members, which is not the case. In fact, kill teams of that size is, if anything, a rarity, since attrition has a nasty habit of knocking down the membership roster rather quickly. So we're looking at something between probably 2,000 to 4,000 Astartes. And then, of course, we start adding in all of the smaller watch stations, the outposts, the supply depots, and the smaller teams out on specialist missions. To be honest with you, we really have no idea about the numbers of these stations precisely, but I think we can probably make some speculations. Considering the amount of specialized equipment required by the Deathwatch, considering that they are required to always be at the beck and call of the Inquisition, and considering the highly specialized nature of their objective, and the sheer amount of training and conditioning required to make them effective, I would be surprised if more than half of the Deathwatch were deployed to these smaller objectives at any one time. So if I'm to make a very, very general estimate, I'd say somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000 Astartes total. Which is quite the force. We are approaching Great Crusade era Legion formations with those kinds of numbers. And all of that power is at the beck and call of the Ordo Xenos. I think we can all be very happy that the Ordo Xenos, just like any Inquisitorial order, is somewhat splintered and unfocused. Because the thought of that much killing power being in the sole possession of a small group of mortals, or, God Emperor help us, a single mortal, with all of our flaws and pride, yeah, that seems like an extraordinarily bad idea. Though, to be fair, the Deathwatch is an extraordinarily focused and specialized organization, and I'm sure they'd start asking a lot of questions if their Inquisitorial masters started to point them in the direction of non-Xenos threats. And that probably is a very, very good thing. For the Deathwatch is able to combine the finest weapons, armor, spacecraft, vehicles, and equipment in the Imperium with the implacable will, determination, and skill of the best and brightest of the Adeptus Astartes, combining the best assets of all the chapters of the God Emperor's Space Marines into one complete, unified, and mostly harmonious force. They truly are elites amongst the elites, and unlike some Primaris Marines, they've actually earned that elite status. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.